Hey everybody, welcome to our weekly Data Talk, a show where we talk with data science leaders from around the world. Today, we're talking to Javier Campos. He's the head of the Experian Data Labs in UK and I, and also EMEA. Javier, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you very much.
Javier, I had a blast going through your LinkedIn profile, and I would love if you can kind of share your academic journey, because I thought it was so interesting how you went from physics into robotics.
Yes, thank you. So my background had always been fascinating. I'm very interested about artificial intelligence, even since I was a child for many reasons. I was also fascinated in how we can actually build a machine that can do what we do. And so this is part of the story. So effectively, I started, I will say it's one of these meetings. It was a workshop that a very famous physics person called Roger Penrose. He's actually a British professor from Oxford University. And he's got a lot of books about strong artificial intelligence, what we call, this is the next generation, not the current one. And he has a strong view. So I actually was lucky enough to attend this face-to-face person with him, and he really influenced me a lot. And the things one of the things he was saying is, we cannot have a strong artificial intelligence with the current generation of computers, which I actually agree. So after having the honor to meet this person and being in a session, there were quite a few people there. I actually decided to basically study physics, because it's got the strong mathematical background that you need to tackle a lot of these algorithms. And also link with the engineering part, within the robotics. You need all the fundamentals to build what we call the strong AI. I mean, as I said, and I will say later on, this is something which it will go it will take a few years.
You mentioned that your interest in artificial intelligence happened when you were much younger, and I thought that was very fascinating. Was it movies? Was it books? What got you interested in AI as a child?
Well, there were actually, it was a mixture of the movies, but also the books. So Roger Penrose have two books, which I strongly recommend to anyone interested. He has three, but the two then, which are The Emperor's New Mind and Shadows of the Mind. The second one, Shadows of the Mind, is there are two parts. The second part is a bit heavy on the mathematics. And it goes to really complex concepts like the Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which actually talks about as another fascinating one of the amazing things in mathematics.
When you were in school and just getting very fascinated by computers, artificial intelligence, reading these books, listening to these lectures, were you always did you always love like the math classes and the science classes?
In my case, yes, that's the other probably component. I've always been, especially after I turned sort of 15, 16, all of a sudden it's like everything clicked. Especially math, I could do very well. I could do pretty much everything the teacher will put me. I would do it well. Wow. In one occasion, which the rest of my class didn't thank me for that. I think it was a physics exam, and the teacher they put a problem, and they basically, once we did the exam and they marked it, and they marked me wrong, and there a lot of the class right, but I was convinced that I was right. So because just to prove it that I was still quite young, that was when I was 17. So I went to the university. I knew a professor, and I said, look, I really think this is wrong. Can you help me to prove it? And then the professor sort of laughed and said, actually, you're right. And he helped me write, and I went back to my teacher, and I said, look, this is and to be fair to her, she actually then rechanged everything. So she corrected me as right. And so I always love algorithms, patterns, also computers as well. It's all related. And so I got very young into one of in Europe, the first computers that they were available were called Spectrum, which actually they were made by a British guy, Sinclair. And the Spectrum, I remember getting one of those, and I was fascinated, and I was really, really quickly, and I also learned myself because I really loved it so much. I got books. Those days, there wasn't really an internet yet quite. The internet didn't really come until the sort of mid-90s. So I have to basically go to libraries and get books and research and proof, and a lot of the mini research, just try and error.
I love your story about getting that physics problem wrong in class and being so determined, like, no, I know what I did here. I think I'm right. And you were so driven that you went to another professor to just validate that you're right. I love that. And I think that's a lot what people that are in the sciences working with data, you're having to, if someone says you're wrong on something, you have to like go back and like prove your case using math. And then you went on to, after you got your degree in physics, to then go into robotics. What, you certainly could have continued on with physics. What drew you to leave physics and then go into robotics?
Well, I actually, it was even a bit more nerdy. I actually finished, I did the 2 degrees at the same time.
Oh.
So I continue and I finished the degree in physics. So I did fundamental theoric, and I then studied the robotics as well. So I end up, by the time I finish, I have the 2 degrees. So I have to, it was really, really hard to study both at the same time, especially the schedule and everything, but I managed to do this well. So I actually end up with 2 degrees at the same time, it is a bit unusual.
That is amazing. No, that is like, yeah, unusual and also extremely difficult because those are 2 very difficult programs.
They are, especially physics is more, and the last year is fundamental physics. So it was a lot about quantum mechanics, which the mathematics are really, really heavy. So I remember my last paper at university in physics, and I still remember it was like 12 papers doing mathematical equations. It was a wave function of, it was a relatively simple problem, but it's quite complex. So you have an atom of, I think it was 12 electrons, like perfectly distributed, and then you fire a photon, and you have to calculate the wave function. That looks simple, but because all these things are coupling, in quantum mechanics, you have things interact to each other, and it gets really complicated. So the mathematics are actually 12 pages. And then when I finished, when I finished the paper, I thought, I can do these things, but I don't think I understand quantum mechanics. So I was a bit depressed. And then when I was reading one of the founders, which is Wes Schrödinger, basically he said, you really understand quantum mechanics when you realize that you cannot understand it. Because it's so, and of course, I mean, we know today, by the way, we know that physics is still incomplete. So we know that both quantum mechanics and relativity are incompatible. So one of, in their scope, they're both very successful and they work very well, but we know that one of them must be wrong. So in quantum mechanics, there is something which it will be used by the future generation of the quantum computers, but in quantum mechanics is something called coherence, which means that coupling, or entanglement is the technical term. So it means you get a system of, let's say, 2 electrons, and if one is spin 1, the other one is, is the negative one. So effectively, until you measure the system, you don't know which one it is, but you know that is, if you measure 1, so they're all connected. So if you measure 1 and it's spin +1, the other one is spin -1. So that's fine. Quantum works. We know this works, and it's been proved many times. The challenge is you have this coupled system. What happens if you separate it really, really long distance, more than 1 year light? Actually, it doesn't need to be that long, but a long distance. Now that's when things started to go wrong, because what happened is, according to quantum mechanics, if I measure one part of the 2 systems, +1, immediately I know the other one is -1, and the other way around, and I don't know which one until I measure. But according to relativity, nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. So the concept of the systems, so on quantum mechanics, things are coupled, even if they are really, really far away, which will mean that the information has to transmit instantaneously. But according to relativity, that's not possible. So we know that this is being, again, it's called the Bell paradox. It's been from the early 20s. So the 2 things are incompatible, meaning, and there are many theories about that. So some without going into all the quantum mechanics, which is also fascinating, by the way, maybe for another talk. And the other thing, well, for quantum mechanics, we suspect there might be something else. So it's not it's a really useful mathematical tool, allow us to calculate probabilities. It's like a good tool, and it's very successful. It's one of the, actually, I would say, the most successful theories of the 20th century, even more of the same as relativity, but we know that the both things are not compatible. So there is more to come. So that's physics is also another fascinating. The other reason why I follow still this physics and also mathematics is because actually a lot of the mathematics from physics are very useful in artificial intelligence and machine learning. A lot of the algorithms, because if you think about AI and data science, is the similar. AI is so successful because it's able to extract a lot of symmetries on the data. So, for example, a deep learning system is able, with relatively little information, to capture a really wide behavior. That's the definition of intelligence. Like, for example, in image recognition, with relatively a thin model, you can reconnect. You can see whether it's cat or not cat. The usual cat or dog. The mathematics is actually fascinating. They are very similar to what happened in physics. Physics, again, is also very successful because you can describe the laws of nature with a relatively small set of equations. So there is and the way physics does it is exploiting the symmetries of nature. And that's why, there are some formulas which are very beautiful. They encapsulate a lot of the symmetry that is in the universe. We have also that symmetry also in the data. So, for example, in the data set, I'm just going to some concrete examples. One of the projects that my team has done, which has been very successful, is to create advanced credit models using bank transactional data. So you have data in your bank transactions. We can actually read that, analyze, classify, and then predict your behavior and see whether you are actually going to pay or not. And we can do better than using the classical bureau data, which is just looking at the end of the month, how is your accounts. This actually looks at how you use the account, what type of things you buy. So we categorize all the information, we run some models, and again, what the machine is doing there is extracting, you can imagine humans, we like to follow patterns, and what we're doing there is we're just looking at data and extracting the key signal that allow us to predict how is your behavior, and sometimes looking at really things which are a bit counterintuitive. But this is the power of the data science and the machine learning. Can actually learn from the data and extract patterns, which are also linked to the way the humans we behave. And we use this across the overall spectrum for credit risk, for fraud, for marketing as well, how to interact with you better, and many, many use cases.
I'm curious about your, after you left university, because you could have continued on, become a professor, become a teacher, researcher. What led you to leave academia and go into industry?
It's a good question, and I was actually quite close to go, and in particular to the US. So I had the potential opportunity. I studied in Spain, and then at some point, and this is like this moment in life when probably my life would have been very different, but I have the opportunity to go to Caltech in California. So there were some grants, government, and I could have done, but in the end, rightly or wrongly, and what time will say, I also have the opportunity to come to the UK, which then I joined a management consultant, Accenture, and I decided to go to industry, get to know the business, how everything works. And my thinking is, well, let's try to understand how companies work. I was also fascinated by that, and then eventually I will keep this as my hobby rather than taking. But at the time, is one of those moments which, it was a 50-50 decision.
Yeah, that must have been really difficult for you.
Yeah, it's difficult because they are very, very very different paths.
Yeah, gee whiz. What did I'm curious about what your family thought, because when you have these two huge opportunities, one to go to one of the best universities in the world, Caltech, or jump into doing some really interesting things in industry. I'm curious about, like, as you were kind of deciding these two huge, amazing options, what did your family say to you?
Well, I think they were very supportive, and
Yeah.
they say, well, they either want to influence or do whatever you feel like. I think that, and the reason why, and I think, and I'm having a few conversations. The university route is sort of a slower path in terms that it takes longer, and versus the, and I'm looking backwards, or looking back, and also, by the way, the other thing which is important to remember is at the time when I did that, the machine learning, artificial intelligence was not very. It was like something really obscure.
Mm.
In fact, a couple of my professors advise against, say, look, don't even to do the degree, say, don't study robotics because there is no future.
Oh,
There was a lot of
really?
hype. Yeah, there was a. I mean, if you look at the history of AI, which is from the 60s, it's fascinating because it's always have like a up and downs, and what they call winters of AI. There's been a couple, and so in the 60s there was a big hype. I actually was part of a bit of the end of the 80s, early 90s, which was expert systems, which is what my robotics engineer degree. That's what I did, an expert system, by the way. And you always get to, well, because you can do an expert system, all of a sudden you're going to replace all humans within the next week, and then gets very, and that's what there is a bit of a winter, because what happened is there is a lot of expectations, inflation. Then if you think about, and it's already, today is happening. There are some people that said that it's going to come. I don't think, because it's quite different. I don't think it's going to come another winter, but what happened is, as soon as there is a bit of potential, all the investment, all the, when you think about it, venture capitalists, they put money at risk. When there is a bit of potential, that's where all the money goes. And then what happened is, of course, because you put so much funding on, and if the potential is not big enough, then after a few years, people see this is not working, they then withdraw the fund. The fascinating thing about AI is that I think it keeps coming. I do believe there is a tremendous potential. Today, we are, a lot of the hype on the press, we are just scratching the surface. There is so much. I think there is a bit of, which doesn't help, perception that the strong AI is going to happen next week. We're very, very far away from there, that's for sure. But that means that at the same time, there's a lot of potential to do many things, to explore other. If you think about this latest hype, it's been pretty much exclusively on one family of algorithms of deep learning. There are about 5 different type of algorithms. This is being very successful, but still there are many things to explore. I do believe, especially if we want to crack strong AI, we're going to have to start at some point joining different algorithms, which is quite a challenging thing to do, by the way, and we're still a few years away. But if you look at, the best measure, when you look at the papers being published on AI, and there is a website called Archive, which, I think it's actually based in Caltech, or it's one of the university in California, or Conway. The website is quite famous. It's called Archive. And when you look at the papers being produced, I think, if I don't remember correctly, last year there are thousands of papers. At the moment, mostly 80% is deep learning. There is a bit of reinforced learning, which is another type of algorithm. But actually, as I said, there are about 5 different families of algorithms. There are other things which are not. There are people doing, but the level of interest or research is less. So I think this. So the point is, there is a lot of potential out there.
I'm curious about the things that you're seeing right now that, yeah, because there is certainly a ton of hype right now. I feel like whenever I go to my news app, there's always something about artificial intelligence in the headline nowadays. I'm curious about the things that are happening that you're actually super excited about.
I mean, the first one is reinforcement learning. That is a technology. Some of the frameworks they've been released recently, and actually one of the big giants like Facebook has released one. I think Google also has released some code, and is actually it's very exciting. For our industry, it's a bit more challenging because in terms of explainability, and there are a few challenges with, you can argue that deep learning also has challenges, but it can be explained. Reinforcement learning it's an extra level of complexity there, but all these things can be tackled, by the way. So for me, reinforcement learning within deep learning, I think one area which is relatively, I would say, not new, but maybe it's not still in mainstream, GANs, which is generative adversarial networks. Basically, it's two deep learning networks, which they are competing with each other. And you do that so basically what you do is, the way it works, you start feeding, let's say, cat or dog and cat pictures. So you have a discriminator, and then you have a generative network, and then you have a deep learning model. You have another model. So the way it happens is on one network you show this is cat, this is dog, and then the deep learning is telling you yes or no. But then on the generative start producing random data, and then it starts saying is this a cat or dog. And then the purpose of these two networks that are competing is to try to fake the real pictures. So the discriminator has to say that real or not. So what happens is when you have two deep learning networks to compete, what happens is the generative one actually learns how the deep learning works. It learns the model. This is the technology that, for example, they used to do fake, probably you've seen the videos, fake videos. So the way is, imagine someone could actually take this video, get my picture, my voice, my movement of the head, and using a gun, it could actually change my face for pretty much anyone else. It will take a static picture and then it will change. How to do that? Because the gun will learn how to generate my full picture, and how can it do it. So guns are, and they're really cool. They can be used to generate incomplete data. So we're actually researching, and we have a couple of really exciting projects in the UK data labs to explore that potential usage. And I think some of the most exciting papers in the last couple of months is basically as I said, this idea of the starting to convert some of the algorithms. There's starting to be a bit few things. The transfer learning also is quite tricky to do. There are a few papers there which are starting to look promising. Quite a few things. I mean, the challenge anyone working on data science has which is crazy. I mean, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of papers every week. And it's actually hard to know which ones are good versus not, and more important, which ones are relevant for us. Because as you can imagine, the community is massive, many industries, and a lot of the research for us is not really useful. It's interesting, but there are people working on genetic algorithms to do certain things. So to really be constantly looking at it and see what is for us, what is not, because we do a research and apply research. So we take some papers that have been published recently, and then we take them and we put them in industry.
What advice do you have for these young data scientists coming out to help them keep current with what's happening with AI research or just data science research?
It might be a good idea to specialize, especially at the beginning, until you actually understand an area, because there are so many, and some of them could take you years just to come to the basic, let alone then to go to the. So I will say, don't be. It is realistic for you to, if I ask, would I expect any new student be absolutely up to the latest on everything is practically impossible, because the volume, also to read these papers is actually quite hard. I mean, it takes a bit of time to digest it, and then you also have to make a point what is useful, what is not. So for me, the 2 points is specialize, but the most important thing is practice. Another good options which some people do is to enter some of these websites like Kaggle, when you can do competitions, and this is also a very good way to show your skills and compete. But even if you don't do that, because that's also a very specific usage, which sometimes is not useful for machine learning to put in production. It's not all about just pure performance in terms of how much an algorithm can predict something, whatever metrics. It's a balance of things into performance. Okay, what is your science performance in terms of how much you can predict, but also how quickly you can do it. For a fraud system, for example, if you have two options, a fraud system that can have, a very, very high Gini or whatever metric you're using, meaning that it can really tell with a really low level of, with a very high precision, a very few mistakes, but it takes 10 seconds, and it's only make one mistake every 10 or whatever. That system compared to one that actually might make 2 or 3 mistakes, but can give you the answer in 100 milliseconds. If you are doing a fraud system for a credit card company, I can tell you the 10 seconds, you cannot put it in production. Because imagine going to a shop, you put your credit card, oh, sorry, because the spirit, we need to wait 10 seconds until the model said whether you are, this is somebody has stolen your car or not. You can do that. So the performance, there is a lot of trade-off, which sometimes people don't see. That's why these Kaggle competitions tend to focus too much on a particular metrics. But for me, the advice to data scientists is, really get your hands dirty. Make sure you really get to the data, run the models. A lot of probably people see it when you get to a lot of the difficulty on the models is really to understand the data. On that subject, really the subject matter expert helps a lot. And in many cases, the difference between a model being successful or not is when you really understand from the business point of view what is the data. I know for data scientists, there is sometimes it's not they don't like, but most data scientists are really focused on the actual data from the abstract point of view. So, for example, if they have to do whatever they do, they might see, one field, another field, but sometimes it pays off tremendously. And this is sometimes also my job to do a translation. Say, well, out of the 10 fields, guess what? This one is really, really important because to really understand the data, how do you get it, how reliable it is. That is more the business and is absolutely pays off.
As you have built out teams and hired data scientists at various companies, you've served as CIO, CTO, and now you're the head of the Experian Data Labs in UK and I, and also EMEA. What are important qualities? What do you look for when you're bringing on people to join your teams?
For me, I think the one thing, and I'm quite happy. I think the team in our lab, and starting with our chief scientist, who actually he came from NASA, so it was we stole it from wow. You guys. It's a really top guy. I think there are a few, when you talk to all the people, they have to be really intellectual, curious people, really curiosity, have a lot of scientist background, a lot of strong foundations. And yes, it's a combination of being, having the ability to have curiosity about the data, to really the right background in terms of quite a scientific background. So you can actually, because on our data lab, we really try to push to the next, and a lot of the products that all the products, when when we eventually release them, is the first time we've done it across, not just across Experian, but across the industry, which is a very, it's going back to when we're talking about it's challenging the norm and being a bit brave and saying, look, this is this way. And you, as you can imagine, and especially, for example, even within the current, our biggest banks, our biggest clients, the big banks, they are big organizations, they have big departments, and they've always been doing things in certain ways. So anything that is new is not a trivial thing to do. So you need the right mental capabilities. The attitude is also very important, really humble. We have our lab is quite flat in terms of everybody can fail, and we do actually criticize in the scientific way. So we do peer-to-peers, and here everybody can make a correct, well, I don't like to say correction, can make an improvement to the team. And it's only when you bring all people together and when you have the right of environment, when people are not afraid to make a mistake. On the contrary, because we push the teams, it's okay to, and I don't call them mistakes, I call them learnings. The same that the machine learns, we, the scientists, have to learn. So it's good to be in the right direction, make hypotheses, and then when they're right, great, and when they're not right, we'll bring the team and we'll do it better.
I love that you call it learnings, just like machine learnings, when there's failures or things along the way that are difficult. What tell us about how you went from a practitioner into a leadership role, because I looked at your background and you jumped into leadership roles very, very quickly. And I'm curious, did you know early on that you wanted to be a leader?
Yes, and the reason is a bit of perhaps looking back when I make the call between academia and industry is, for me, it's a question to implement change around us and probably in society. One of the things I always, and I also tell my children and everyone is, when you are asked to explain your career, I would love, and that's what I always try to be in the right place, so I can prove that I was involved in projects that actually really changed the world. It might seem like a bit of a cliche, but actually a lot of the stuff I've done and I still doing it is the case. So one of the challenges I realized very quickly, and we do have the same in in any large organization, you're going to have a lot of management layers, and in actually many projects, when they fail, it's not because of the fundamentals or the people doing the work. And I work in many companies, especially from my days in Accenture. Very few people you can call people that they don't know how to do it. In most cases, when projects don't work, is actually to do with the management. So one of the things is rather than complaining about it, do something about it, become one of them, and then it's up to me to actually do it. So that's what and for me today, I'm in a very fortunate position, because having an amazing team, which for me, I don't see as the lead of the data lab in our data lab. It's more my job is how can I put the right successful, and I keep saying, for me, I will be successful if I create the environment where they or we all as a team can do the best job of our careers. And in terms of products, we're working on 2 or 3 very exciting products, and I'm pretty sure they're going to work sooner or later. But when they work, they will make an impact. And I would love in quite a few years to say, you know what, the first company that actually launched that product was Experian, and I was part of that. That's what I really strive to do. That's what in our labs, we all trying to, and we work very hard, but to do that, you have to push boundaries, and is quite, and also as well, just to, is change is not easy. It's not easy also for the rest of Experian or for our clients. So it's a challenging, but it's very rewarding.
For the people that are interested in applying to work in one of our data labs, What advice do you have for them in their interviewing process?
So our process actually is quite involved. Just to give you an idea, in the UK, in other regions might vary, but it takes an average of 8 months from the time we start hiring to the time we make an offer.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's a very lengthy process. We analyze a lot of CVs. So on the CVs, we look for, depending on the seniority, but especially for the more senior role, we actually look for experience, real experience, because as you can imagine, there is a lot of hype. So what has happened is many people that used to be called business intelligence analysts, remember the BI, they are, all of them, they now call all of a sudden data scientists. And actually you come, it's a very different thing to be an analytic, sort of what I call an analytic classical, or do business intelligence, which you need certain skills. For a data science is a big gap. I mean, you can of course do it, but there are the gaps. So for me, you have to have the scientific and the background, depending on the seniority, the experience or not. If you are applying for one of the more junior roles, of course, we wouldn't expect you to have. And then part of this long process is because we do a lot of face-to-face interviews. And part of the interview process also we have, which in many cases is the best way to see someone, rather than asking you theoretical questions, which that is a bit biased, because if you are good at presenting yourself, you might give the answers I want to hear, I might hire you, but that doesn't mean you're going to do then a good job. So we have a practical case study. So we give anyone that goes through the process, so they send the CV, then we do some screening to make sure we can fit the right person to the right role. And then if we think there is a good match both ways, we explain what we're doing. It has to be, then we'll send a case study. And then the candidates have to come they come to the lab with all the team, and we do like a joint presentation of the model. So basically what we do is we send a data set. We've been prepared and say, look, this is this data set. Can you please come and create a model to predict something, and then come and present it? And then we start asking questions. And I think the advice for people is, well, make sure you practice when you come to the presentation. Make sure you also think out of the box. And then that's the best way, because by doing this, and because it's a couple of days sometimes, so we do face-to-face, it's quite good, because it doesn't end up being an interview. Interviews tend to be a really stressful, only an hour. It's very difficult to really know whether both sides, sometimes we are obsessed about saying, look, we need to have the right, you need to know what is to work here is look like. So when you join, you are comfortable and you're happy and you can develop your career. And the other way around, we need to know that you are going to be successful, because if we hire you and you don't have the right skills or the right attitude, you will not be happy, and eventually it will be bad for you, bad for us. So we want to ensure that it's a bit like chemistry meetings, actually. In marketing, they do this in pitches. When you do a big marketing pitch, there is a chemistry meeting between the two teams. Can we work together? This is a bit the same. So, of course, the chemistry you cannot prepare, but what you can prepare is make sure you are familiar with doing case studies for data science, where you get a model, you get data, then you have to clean it, prepare it. Then what we actually check is not even the solution to the model, which, by the way, is quite tricky, but we don't care. How do you approach, how do you look at the problems and the challenges. As I say, we don't check who is actually get the best model, because it's not relevant. It's more about the thought process.
Yeah, and I guess also getting to know their personality and how they deal with criticism, because when you're in business meetings and a leader doesn't believe your whatever your data is you're trying to present, you need to make sure that you are able to argue your case, but also be humble with the leader.
Absolutely. And the other aspect, which is also true, is also the ethics.
Right. And I guess it's only through that type of rigorous interviewing process where you're actually having to get to the point where you're presenting something you've learned from a data set and talking to a full team, where you actually kind of see their personality, what they'll actually do, how they deal with criticism, maybe even, like you said, some of the ethical decisions that they're making. All that is very, very revealing, and helps you bring on the right person. And amazing to hear that, you guys are very, very thoughtful, like 8 months on average to bring in somebody. It means you care a lot about somebody who's joining the team. That's not just a quick, 2 or 3 interviews and you're in. It's actually you actually have a very thorough process. Like it's a special opportunity to join your team, and so you take the time, a considerable amount of time, to make sure you're bringing on the right person.
It's so important to have the right chemistry on the team, and as we see it now, because the team now is working really, really well. We just also moved recently to a new office, which in the UK, Experian has created this consumer innovation experience center. So we just got a floor in one of the tallest building called Heron Tower in the city in London. So we do have now a really special team. So it's very important that we, to maintain that cohesion, that we get the right people. This is a very competitive industry. So as I said, our packages are really pretty much, of course, within the industry, but I would say even higher. So it's a really well paid. But sometimes we have the case of, for example, again, this varies, but people that they have been, this is the people that have been working on investment banking, for example, in trading, high trading frequency and things like that, which over there is quite a more transactional type of, I work for this firm for X, I do, that type of profile. Sometimes we try to get a combined thing, which is, there is a bit of purpose in a very good, very solid company as Experian and with a competitive package. But if you're just looking for exclusively a big package, even when we have it, as I said, well, maybe it's other, maybe a consultancy, for example, might help you better, because it's not what we do.
Awesome. Javier, thank you so much for being our guest in Data Talk. For those that want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to follow you?
Well, probably email or my profile in LinkedIn as well. I follow, so anyone who can, please feel free to connect. I'll connect. I do have several thousands of connections, so I do try to keep up. But yeah, so there is a good. I also on Twitter, although I'm not as frequent. So probably the best way is LinkedIn.
Okay, wonderful. For those looking to connect, just look for Javier Campos on LinkedIn, and you can connect with him there. Follow him. Check out his profile. Javier, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you very much.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for checking out this episode of the Data Talk podcast. My name is Mike Delgado, and we record this show every single week on Facebook Live. If you found this show helpful, please let us know by rating us on iTunes. And if you want to know about past episodes or upcoming ones, you can always go to the Experian blog. The URL is just experian.com/datatalk. Again, that's experian.com/datatalk. And that'll bring you over to the page where we have a listing of all of our show notes and past episodes. We recorded over 100 so far. And we're also looking for your recommendations. So if you ever have suggestions around topics or guests you'd like to hear from, please let us know. You can reach out to us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @ExperianDataLab, or you can just reach me directly @Mike Delgado. Thanks so much for your support, and thanks so much for subscribing to our shows.